Terrific, and welcome back, and I hope everybody will come back into the auditorium, but our next topic is one of the most important topics if we hope to have civilization or even just people, on missions to Mars. Food. We obsess over vehicles, rockets, and everything else, but we don't really think as much as we should about how we're going to feed astronauts. It's not just a matter of storing a whole bunch of food for 3 years. It's very complicated. And so this has been a topic that we've been interested in at Explore Mars for many, many years. And we continue this every year as a tradition to kind of look at the new innovations and how people are thinking about how we're going to feed people going to Mars and generally just in space. And can we create sustainability, and can these processes that we're creating food for space benefit us here on Earth? Leading our panel today is Dr. Tiffany Vora. Tiffany is one of our Explore Mars board members, but she has an extraordinary resume, which I'd probably spend the next 6 hours reading through. But I'll just kind of say right now, her current position is faculty and vice chair, digital biology and medicine at Singularity University. Tiffany.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm absolutely delighted to be back up here on stage to talk with you guys about one of my favorite things, which is future food. And I feel like if we could bring the cookies in from the foyer, we might get some more people in here, right? So today I am joined by two gentlemen who are working at the forefront of this technology space. Now, we were lucky in that our friends from the Mars Innovation Challenge just before the break gave us some background on the challenges and opportunities when it comes to food on Mars. Now, I know that for me, since I did these 3 analog Mars missions, it is unbelievable how important food is, not just to our physical well-being, but to our psychological well-being as well when we are under these extreme conditions, and they're stressful conditions. So I'm going to invite our 2 panelists today to introduce themselves, to tell them a bit about the work that they're doing at this great innovation space, and then we're going to have a bit of a chat about where the problems and the opportunities are and where we see this going. So Dr. Arttu, would you start us off?
Thank you very much, Tiffany, and I'm clicking. Here we go. Yeah, my name is Arttu Luukanen, and I work for a company called Solar Foods. I just want to start off by saying that I'm really happy to be here in DC with my daughter. Having spent here 4 days, I think I'm starting to thaw out. It's nice to see the sun again. Actually, at the heat, when I had the lunch, I was always like feeling wearing a towel and having a beer in my hand. That's usually the temperature that happens. So we here at Solar Foods are actually one of the finalists for NASA Deep Space Food Challenge. After the event here, I'm actually heading out to New York, where the finalists and the winners will be announced on actually tomorrow. We heard the other day, actually, one of the panelists, Jancy McPhee from NASA, indicating that one of the largest areas of which needs de-risking is food when we're considering manned Mars missions. We at Solar Foods are executing our prime objective here on Earth to actually provide the mankind with a sustainable source of protein that has a fractional use of land, energy, or water. We see significant future business with basically the largest food manufacturers here on Earth. Our method of producing food, and by the way, what's rolling up here on the screen is our prototype design of the spacefaring bioreactor system. But what is one of the key features of our food production process that it is completely disconnected from agriculture. What we do is basically, it's called microbial gas fermentation. We have discovered a single-cell organism from the Finnish nature, and this organism uses hydrogen gas as its source of energy. It gets its carbon from CO2 that we capture directly from the air. Because we can actually use the hydrogen that is already produced on board a spacecraft, you remember there is an electrolyzer that's producing the oxygen for the crew, but the hydrogen is treated as a waste product and vented primarily to space, either in form of a hydrogen or methane. Because we can recapture that hydrogen, we actually save a lot of water, which could be about 0.5 liter per day per crew member, which actually adds up if you're on your way for a long period of time. We are very low on TRL with respect to space at this moment. We have started our first space projects, and we look to partner up with the future habitat companies and also agencies on LEO, and of course have our eyes steadily set on Mars. We won't be the only food that probably has to be produced. We just saw the wonderful Mars, the price presentation. Some agriculture is very likely to be needed, given that we make protein, we don't make carbohydrates and sort of high caloric content food. So there's plenty of space for innovation for food production, but we think that protein and this method of protein that we produce is particularly well suited with ECLES systems on board the space habitats, and protein is one of the hardest parts of that diet that you need. All right, that's my pitch.
Can you show the people what you brought?
Oh yeah, I got some here. So the food or the protein is basically this kind of a dry yellowish powder. It is yellow because it's actually very high on beta carotene, so it's almost like my boss puts it, it's an average between a steak and a carrot from a nutritional standpoint. And that's pretty good. And it doesn't taste very much of anything, so it kind of blends in real well with other foodstuffs, which you saw on the screen there.
I had actually offered to do a tasting for you all live here on stage, but alas, regulation does not permit it at this time. But stay tuned. Now, you had a really nice point there that pointed lovely to Dr. Daniel Tomkins. Tell us about your work and where you're coming from for this great challenge.
Sure. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. It's been a journey. I came into this as a space skeptic, coming from an agricultural science and an environmental science point of view. And I saw a lot of this was 5+ years ago. And I saw the issue of scaling a lot of these technologies, and I saw a unique opportunity using plastic to explore. So I'm the founder of GrowMars, and we're not doing anything new on the plastic side. We're actually leveraging how the plastic industry is transitioning into more sustainable feedstocks. You can do a variety of really resilient, non-biodegradable plastics that are bio-derived. They're looking over the horizon in, post-oil world. How do you still synthesize a lot of these materials? And really, it's based on a replication system. So you have an initial greenhouse or photobioreactor, and you're basically harvesting from that and processing additional plastic to make additional greenhouses or bioreactors out of that. And this is from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, just showing how much of a spider web. I saw some of the NASA charts, and I said, okay, I'm going to include this. If they get to include it, I get to include it too. Because this is what kind of opens up eyes generally to what the possibilities are. And there's not any real chemicals that you can't synthesize from a raw biomass, from the different components of it: starch, the cellulose, lignin, oil, protein. So really, you're unbound. You think of, what are you going to do with all the inedible portions of that crop? There's a lot of things you can do with that. So once you harvest that tomato, what do you do with all the leaves, stems, roots? Do you compost it, or do you actually distill all those hydrocarbons into some really useful materials? An interesting one is clear plastic, because it's a compounding, positive feedback loop system in which you can grow more biology within. So, started on Mars, right? There's CO2 on the surface of Mars, but in space, wherever there's humans and there's food, there's also an abundance of CO2 that we have to manage, but we can also utilize that. Not many people are aware that there's essentially an exhaust pipe on the International Space Station venting off some of these materials. Obviously, we send up more food, it has to go somewhere, and a lot of it is easily respired out. We don't have to deal with the human waste side to recover that carbon necessarily. So it's a massive amount of carbon that can be utilized. This, you can produce a large torus-shaped greenhouse from the waste carbon from 4 astronauts. That's including their respiration and the trash waste every year, which when you have a structure that large, you have to worry about micrometeorite impacts before you even worry about like UV light degradation of the plastics, which is a common question. We've got an interesting payload opportunity with Lockheed Martin for doing a demonstration of essentially putting a miniature greenhouse or terrarium, if you will, really to show that we can be good stewards of that waste carbon when we go to the moon. Carbon's really rare there, nitrogen's really rare there. We're going to upcycle that into this ecosystem and then actually harvest off that biomass, again, because you can make so many different things from that biomass. So it's rare elements, things that we we can put to work. So that's an exciting opportunity. And we are really spinning it to be basically a nature documentary on the moon. So the first tree, the first bee, the first fly, a lot of firsts for biology, a lot of miniature species we can put in there and really have life sustaining in a passive way in a closed loop system, but also it's a moon garden. We're going to be able to harvest from that as well. So that kind of leads to this, some fun concept art from James Vaughn. I had the privilege of having a lot of late night talks with him about how to convey this concept through. And I was harping on, the water cycle is immense. You have all these plants respiring, you have to condense that and you have to have it come back down. And he put this massive waterfall in it, which I just thought was ridiculous at the time. But he listened to that and he put that in just to show that the scale, how that can scale upwards. So a lot of little Easter eggs in here, and James has been great to work with. He also did the lunar concept art. So looking into future food options, whether we're here on Earth or we're out in space, we're going to run into these challenges of how to grow. So if we never go out into space, we're still going to have to solve a lot of these big agricultural challenges of where to get food from. And looking at the options, you can bring food along with you. You can bring the material for greenhouses to grow the fresh food. You can bring machines that make greenhouses exponentially, which is what we're working on with that biomass to plastic processing. And you can also bring machines to electrochemically produce plastic, sugar, proteins, very much how hydrogen is being fed for solar foods. So there's a whole spectrum there that's rather interesting. This is from a paper out at Cubes, which is the Center for Utilization of Biology and Exploration of Space. And they really wrapped a lot of this together, showing where it is. This is a great publication if you're really into the details. And I think this shows that spectrum of, okay, is it cellular agriculture? Is it direct electrochemical synthesis of sugars and plastics? It's a whole range of options and hybrid solutions depending on what you're looking to produce ultimately, or what domain you're operating in and under what constraints. So I don't think it's going to be a one size fits all. It's going to be a spectrum, but we'll have lots of greenhouse space wherever we go to produce a variety of foods outside of protein, obviously, which is a very challenging one. And then going back to the laboratory side of things, just to kind of put it within framework, I've had the unique experience of working at the plant pathology level, culturing pathogens and working intensively in a bio lab, but also working out in industrial agriculture and seeing large-scale problems. So I've had a lot of benchtop work and a lot of out in the field work and out in forest ecosystems as well. And it can be grueling in the lab, doing all of this work as well. So when you think of, all our food, 100% of our food is going to be, lab-based and lab-grown, it takes a lot of equipment, it takes a lot of labor ultimately, and it's not that enjoyable. If you have a massive greenhouse, I think it's easier to convince people, especially off-world, to go out in a greenhouse and do some of that work than in the lab doing more pipetting or something. So that's just a little anecdote there.
Well, the lab is my happy place, so if you sit me down there with headphones and pipettes, I'm good to go. So let's talk for a few minutes about how this is going to change over time. So let's start by thinking about early exploration missions, the stuff that we might see happening in the next 10 years, 15 years. So Daniel, what would you say is the #1 problem that keeps you up at night thinking about how to supply food for those early Mars explorers?
I think it's what hardware we bring with us. I mean, when you really boil it down to those options, are we going to bring the food, the greenhouses, the machines to make greenhouses? Is it a scalable, convincible message, both that we can utilize, maybe not the same methodologies on Earth, but similar ones, showing that you can do resource creation, a very optimistic view on creating resources, I think needs to be a cornerstone, both for ultimately succeeding on Earth and in space.
The abundance mindset there really sets us up for success in all areas.
And the expandability and scalability, and hey, I could be doing something similar to that in my backyard. So I think it needs to be minimally viable and scalable.
Excellent. And Arttu, what keeps you up at night? What you think is our main challenge here?
Well, what keeps me up at night right now is the sun in Finland, because it raises at 4. But okay, with respect to producing food, a lot of it has to do with automation. I mean, we've really developed this bioprocess here on Earth to the point where we're actually we're building or constructing our first industrial scale plant, which is a 40 million euro investment. It houses a 20,000 liter bioreactor and will be producing about 100 tons of solein per year. So that side of things is we understand the biology and what's happening and all the downstream processing steps and everything. We understand real well. But when we are talking about missions to Mars and things like that, it can be quite likely that you would actually be sending your food production systems up there ahead. So you're looking at long dormancy periods. Will it start up, after it's been in space for 2 years? We do have some fundamental questions that we hope to be getting answers pretty quickly, which is that if we put these microorganisms that we use, will it survive microgravity and will it survive the radiation environment? There's no evidence that it wouldn't, but it has to be tested. And then finally it comes down to things like, if you're thinking about, you know what a bioprocess looks like.
I do.
You see people running around in lab coats and tweaking and tuning, so obviously that can happen. But that's a systems engineering challenge in terms of automation, monitoring, sensoring, software, all these sort of things. So I'm not too worried, actually.
Cleaning out a bioreactor was my least favorite part of the entire process.
That is true. So indeed, steam in place, clean in place has to be automated. You can't do it manually. All of that has to be done automatically. In microgravity, actually, you may get away with slightly better situation, because in many cases in Earth-based bioreactors, the fouling happens at the water or the slurry gas interface and where the foam is, but you don't necessarily have that in a microgravity reactor. But there are many engineering challenges, but I don't think we need to invent the anti-gravity drive to get this thing going.
To add on to that, in industrial agriculture, especially in the fresh fruit and vegetable markets, in the packing houses, especially with food safety concerns, biofilm formation, cleaning out the biofilms in these washing processes is a huge problem. One of the things they use is acid to break up those biofilms. So one of the things we looked at first was, okay, well, we can't use polycarbonate because it's not acid resistant. So we got to use a plastic that can take an acid cleaning for biofilms. Those are some things that, I don't think, unless you have operational experience with that, you don't really know. Oh, this is a really challenging part.
These are these sexy secrets of food production. You're hearing them right here. So I can't resist asking a biology question here. So from both the microbial point of view and also from the plant point of view that you guys are working on, do you think that the genetic engineering of these organisms is a really important stage? Or do you think that's only just one piece and these other bits we've been talking about are perhaps even more challenging?
I can go first. Yeah, genetic modification is something we're looking very hard into. We're actually starting a pretty sizable European Commission funded program where we will engineer our organism to actually produce protein. Now it doesn't produce protein, we kill it and crush it and there's protein. But this hydrogen oxidizing material that we use, if we engineer it, we could tweak it to produce milk, or we could tweak it to make it to produce some other materials. And I think the possibilities are potentially endless there.
Awesome.
Genetic engineering is an interesting one, especially working in agriculture. I've seen a lot of great opportunities that deployed it, but the market wasn't ready for it. So, even the food we eat now is essentially genetically engineered. We just honestly didn't know what we were doing. When we used coltrazine, like a mutagenic agent in the 50s, we were changing thousands of genes. We had no idea what we were changing and if it was healthier for us or not. And it's still genetically engineered. It's still genetically modified, wildly so. With more precise toolkits, you know exactly what you're changing. So, you know, as we talk about breeding plants or you know, finding new organisms, I think there's a, you know, we need to look at it, you know, now that we know so much more about our human microbiome and how it impacts, you know, there's a lot of things we could do to improve human health along with food to better understand that, both for our old food that's GMO, quote unquote, free, and our new food products. So I'm hoping that, particularly at the science level, science education level, I think it's a generational challenge that hopefully we'll see.
I often say that humans have been genetically modifying organisms for 10,000 years. It's called agriculture, right? It's just how precise are the tools that we're using to do this.
And oftentimes it was, did it allow us to survive to age 30 or 40 better? We have no idea. Does it help us beyond that? Because that's what we utilized it for.
So this is a really nice transition to where I want us to go next, which is to draw a straight line from food for Mars to food for Earth. So where do you see solar foods really playing in a direct line right now for helping make life on Earth better?
Very good question. So on our company track, what we're now getting into is to kind of building large industrial scale facilities, 100 tons, 10,000 tons, 100,000 tons, which will be most likely located in the first world, very much tied into the hydrogen economy, maybe some other industrials where we can tap off their CO2 or H2 or whatever they're producing as a side stream. But at the same time, we are embarking and kicking off a program where we will integrate the bioprocessor into a 40-foot sea container, completely automated. There's another container with a solar panel farm, and these two containers we could then ship into any place on the planet, you know, whether it's South Sudan or the Antarctic, with a capacity for the reactor to produce all of the protein that, say, 200 to 300 people would require. So. And the other mission that we could there help is we have discovered now with the illegal invasion of Russia to Ukraine, and what then entailed was the grain problem, that we couldn't get grain out of Ukraine. So the current food system is pretty brittle when it comes to these systemic shocks which break down logistics chains. And we're very much interested in looking more carefully into more distributed food production. So you would actually have protein availability locally at a sort of a village level.
Would you still need 20,000 liter tanks for that, or could you go
No,
smaller?
no. Then we were talking about 2 cubic meters.
Excellent, excellent. And Daniel, tell us about straight lines, Mars to Earth.
Well, it's been a wandering path. So I think Impulse has an exciting payload. I think, you know, scaling on the point of scaling, you know, how small you can make these systems. Can you make them on a chip? You know, you can do some of this plastic distillation on a microfluidic chip. And you know, I'll be presenting at an Interstellar conference this summer for a von Neumann probe. You know, how small can you materially make something that ultimately is reproducible? So, you know, new opportunities like that may present themselves, and what's exciting is, you know, you can have a growing architecture. You can show, hey, it's not just staying there; it's expanding. It's resource creation capacity, which is something that photovoltaic panels, nuclear reactors don't do. And that's unique to biology, is that it's reproducible, and bioplastic also appears to be very rapidly and energetically efficient at producing.
So now let's zoom out and let's take the 100-year perspective. So let's say we have humans living in permanent settlements on Mars. What are the opportunities? What are the challenges on that long-scale permanent human habitation for food?
Well, like I think we all agree that whatever is it that we grow over there, there's going to be a pretty broad set of things that we grow there. I think one thing that is of particular interest, and We actually, at Solar Foods, we operate a food laboratory. It's a fancy word for kitchen, where we develop applications, which is a fancy word for recipe, for using solein in foodstuffs. And I think one of the things that we should start thinking about pretty soon is that, you know, to the foreseeable future, the crew is going to be pretty busy, you know, with all the other stuff. So, what's your galley going to look like? What sort of kitchen utensils do you need there? What sort of equipment so that if, let's say, you know, Dan's farm's flying with us, and you know, one of our bioreactors is spewing this protein. How do you make, with sort of minimal effort, you know, a set of couple of dozen different recipes? How do you do that automatically? To a point, automatically. I mean, some astronauts actually like cooking, so I'm not saying that it has to come out, you know, dial in and there comes the tray. I'm not saying that, but you do maybe need some like 3D printing or this sort of machinery that will do the textures and mix the stuffs and, you know, slice these tomatoes or make puree out of it and whatnot. So I think we have to start also not just looking at the front end of food production, but also the kind of the back end and that side.
Yes, and you've brought up an excellent point, which is that food is about more than calorie delivery. Food is community, food is relationships, food is creativity, food is expression. And so I think it's also really important that we keep those elements as well when we're thinking about what the future food looks like. What about you? What do you think for long term?
Well, I'm pretty convinced alcohol will be involved.
100%.
Chris has got me convinced on that.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
But I think the bifurcation will be on electrochemical synthesis and biomanufacturing is if cold fusion is successful and scalable, how much of our food is ultimately energetically derived from that at one point in that spectrum of synthetic biology and cellular agriculture. You know, can we reduce the footprint of agriculture? It's a massive amount of land use on Earth. Can we, you know, unload that, but also kind of, you know, not eat a purely synthetic diet? You know, truly, do we know what is the best diet for us? I don't think we do. I think we're understanding the human microbiome and the genetic portions of that. And it may be we need to eat, you know, whole foods and whole vegetables. It may mean that we need to just have the right microbiome. So in 100 years, it may look a lot the same. It may look totally different. We may be able to, you know, drink the green goo and it's tailored to us and for our human health. We'll have enough insight into that. But it will definitely be post-oil, which is the biggest challenge. And whether we go to space or whether we stay here, we're going to have to solve that challenge energetically and materially. And it will be over that horizon for sure in 100 years. So,
right, I mean, that's what we're talking about here, right? No petrochemicals going into the production of food. That's a pretty big, that's a seismic shift from what we've had in the past.
It's huge. Working in industrial agriculture, I mean, all the plastics we use for microjet irrigation to the chemicals that are petroleum derived, both on the organic side and inorganic side, all the energy that's used and all the processing, refrigeration. I mean, we don't have yet a food system that is post-oil. You know, how do we do that? I mean, space is an instant, you know, greenwashing filter and an instant, you know, post-oil filter. And that's what excites me about it, because I see a lot of greenwashing and I see you know, a lot of other challenges, and space is that filter. It either sticks or it doesn't.
So we're coming up toward the end of our short session, but if anyone has any questions, please come up to the microphone, tell us who you are and what you would like to know. We have someone approaching right now.
Yeah, this is Hoppy Price at JPL. And earlier, bees and flies were mentioned. And so
yeah, I want to hear about that too.
So if there is a viable greenhouse on Mars, would you need to have insects to make it work? Do we need bugs on Mars?
I think for their role in decomposition, absolutely. There are things like calendula and stuff, right? Mechanical decomposition of foods. I mean, I often argue chickens because, I mean, you can put a watermelon in with chickens and that thing will be demolished, right? Is you still need something mechanically to break these things down.
Yeah, worms.
Worms and stuff. So I think it's going to take a spectrum of life, and insects. I mean, I've taken a lot of entomology courses and they do a lot of work for us. We don't think of that.
Okay.
I did a terrarium thing for an for a kids essentially event at a makerspace, and I said, what biology would you bring with us? You know, no one included like, you know, the microbes in our wastewater treatment system that denitrify, you know, the water or anything, nitrogen fixing bacteria. No, you know, it was my dog, my parents, like to make sure we're still eating and stuff. It was really interesting seeing, you know, the gap in there of understanding of how much work biology does for us at the front end and at the back end that we just take for granted.
This is where the colonial history analogy breaks down, because when these colonists went to other lands, there were already living things there, including other people, but plants and animals and bugs and bacteria and all this stuff, and when we go to Mars, we don't have that. I mean, it's a real difference. Let's do another question.
Thank you. So, is mic on?
Yeah.
Yep. All right, great. Regarding the comment earlier about using high technology to sort of save crew time when preparing food, but what about the crew time required to maintain these high technologies? Do we know how it shakes out, the trade?
Where are you guys on repairability?
Oh, absolutely. So the way we've embarked on this is that, like I said, you know, your regular bioreactor is it's swarmed by lab coat guys or girls tweaking. All of that has to go. So everything has to be completely automated. Of course, there will be wearing and tearing parts, pumps, filters, and things like that. So it's unlikely that you could fly a bioreactor-based system without a set of spares. And we've looked into that. What sort of spares would we need? We've actually calculated the weight, the volume, and all that, and it's not a lot. I mean, there is some, but it's not prohibitive. But yeah, indeed, like from a systems engineering challenge, that is one of the biggest ones, which is how do you design a bioreactor that basically works for 6 months without crew input or maintenance, and then maybe every 6 months you would have to, you know, empty it, clean it, and re-inoculate it, and you get to go again. But it's a good question.
Thank you.
Thank you. And let's do one more. We'll try to keep it snappy.
Hi there. My name is Robert Osteen from 1111 Systems. In terms of human settlement, what would you say are the first 3 or 4 fruits and vegetables that we'll get on a settlement? And then what are something that's the farthest away, the last things we'll bring?
If there's not chocolate, I'm not going. I don't know what else to say about that.
I often get like coffee is a big one. I'm honestly, I'm more focused on creating that expansive shell than, you know, everyone has their own garden. I don't tell them what to grow in it. I want to make sure that that garden can expand in size and has plenty of volume and space to grow whatever you want. So I think fun things like bananas, coffee, you know, apples have traveled around the world, and different parts of that are useful. So,
thank you.
Yep.
All right, would you guys help me thank our panelists?